I'm passionate about it. I think I have a lot of empathy for what people actually go through in large organizations. And it can be really, really tough. And there's this growing disconnect, I think one of you said this, between sort of the class that might occasionally get to go on a private jet and they look down on the company. And then you've got the front line, and during COVID, right, the front line were the heroes. And the CEOs, everybody is excited to connect to the front line, and the people in the middle just got squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. But it's absolutely essential that that group, A, they're future leaders, as you said, but essential that they're motivated. So I'm going to bring into the room someone I've been working with at a client, and I'll call that person Bobby, because that is their name. And it was just really amazing to be around this guy over the last kind of 4 months. So we were doing a really interesting piece of work. What if you could look at every single investment we make in human capital, a bit like Katie's research this morning? How many people in HR? How much we spend on HR tech? What are we doing on DEI? How much training, technical training? Pull it all together. Actually look at it and say, are we getting the highest possible ROI from all of that? And what could we redeploy? And you would think that, interesting question, right? Interesting question. There's the answer coming. There's Bobby right now dialing in. Yeah. And when an executive had the thought that we should do that, they kind of think, well, it's done. Right? I had the thought, I want it. Maybe that's a 2-week job. And of course, it just isn't. Once you start to unpack it, is an FTE in France the same as an FTE in America? Is a contingent worker? How many systems have we got? What about somebody who does HR work, but they're an office manager? Is a receptionist part of HR? And so it goes on. So what Bobby did for us was, first of all, he figured out, he knew instinctively the right people to talk to. He knew the order in which to talk to them. He knew the language and tone to use so that they would reprioritize. And he avoided creating any kind of additional stress in the organization that this study would inevitably lead to something terrible, some kind of resizing. So that's the power of a middle manager. And we just couldn't have done our work together without Bobby. So I'm sure you all have, I'm going to actually ask you to do an exercise around a middle manager. You've got handouts on the table. We'll come to that. So what I'm going to do is paraphrase in the next sort of 20 minutes some learning from a book, another book. This one is unfortunately embargoed, so we can't give you a copy. We can mail it to you. It's coming out. And it's called Power to the Middle. And it documents some research that colleagues have been doing on this critical resource in every organization who can bring institutional knowledge, who can activate the organization, but who have been downtrodden and squeezed, particularly during COVID, but I think over a long period in corporate America. So that's me, that's Alex. Alex will come later. This is the page. I hesitated to put this up because everyone will get distracted, but just know there will be a page, and we're going to ask you to do some thinking. We're going to ask you to think about your version of Bobby. We're going to share with you some building blocks and ask you to assess, what are you doing? Are you doing enough to elevate the Bobbies of the world in your organization? So that's what we're going to do, paraphrase the book, and then have you work and share out. Okay, so let's just do a quick pulse check. We'll change it up a little bit. How much do you actually know about middle managers? Some trick questions. So true or false? We can go table by table if you like, but or hands up. Managers impact employees' mental health as much as their spouses do. Obvious question is, have you met my spouse? But true or false? And Caroline, I've just seen Caroline come in. First time in person, many years on Zoom. What would you, I don't want to cold call my friend Caroline, but I just did. True or false, Caroline? The pressure is on.
I think it's true.
Oh, I knew it. Yeah. Incredible, isn't it? So we're spending all of this money. This was one of the ambitions of the piece of work that Bobby helped with. Actually think about the spend on healthcare as part of your employee experience and see, therefore, if you could actually save money on one side by actually changing the work experience. I will mention something. I'm not an expert in it, but I will mention something. It's in the book that was in your bags, the third book, the Leprechaun book. It talks a lot about the toxic behavior, and it talks about a progression of mental health issues from sort of mild anxiety through to really serious issues and the different interventions. So I'm not an expert on it, but we know that people leave organizations because of their bosses primarily. So this is really, really important. A really, really powerful effect on retention and cost. Next one, how are managers doing? True or false? Less than half of employees say their manager ensures they have a manageable workload. Another true from Caroline. Caroline is crushing it today. The price is right. I heard you. Yeah, 38%. So it's pretty terrible. 62% of people feel overloaded. These are choices that we're making as human beings for each other. True or false? 43% say their managers are effective at coaching and performance management. Trick question. It's even worse. There you go. There you go. We had to change it up a little bit. Look at this. 15% of employees who receive poor manager coaching saw the performance management system as fair. So a review delivered badly by a manager you don't trust, you lose faith in the whole system. Higher stress levels in senior executives. Yeah, you bet. You bet. Yeah. So 42 are stressed out.
What does the data say about why that is?
Oh, it's all of these reasons. It's overload. So there's a progression, essentially. And the reason I said I'm going to be very cautious about this is not my area of expertise, but there's a progression from being at your best, being stretched and thriving, through to being overloaded, through to not being respected, through to being overloaded and in a toxic environment. And there's a correlation between those things and levels of stress from I had a bad day at the office through to severe issues. But the drivers are exactly what you'd expect. Recognition is more important than bonuses or raises. It's really fun when you ask senior executives this one. Oh, another trick question. Yeah, 2 trick questions from McKinsey today. Yeah, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Autonomy. Autonomy. Dan Pink, remember Dan Pink? What was it? Purpose, mastery, and autonomy. Throw in community. And I think you've got the recipe for what does it take for an individual to thrive. I don't think you can really thrive if you don't have a sense of purpose. I don't think you can really thrive if you're not learning, if you don't have the mastery, the skills to do the job, if you don't have autonomy as a human being, and if you don't belong in a community. So as we're trying to reinvent the way we think about change management, we're really starting to think about how can you design with employees, with managers, their experience of change to address those 4 things, as opposed to have a top-down change program. And finally, I think, female managers more consistently attended to workers' well-being. This is the opposite of the trick question, I'm afraid. Yeah. Significantly more likely to check in on well-being and more likely to step in. So, if you didn't believe it before, I think you did. That's why you chose me over, what was it again? Leadership in the science of neurology and psychiatry. We got to do something differently. Let's take ownership of the fact that most of our managers are set up to fail because we haven't created the conditions for them to succeed. That would really change the dynamic within many organizations, and Bobby's would thrive. Executives, I mean, the thing that Bobby gave us and as a team, because we always move fast, was realism. And I think that's what's part of the problem. You can't trust someone who's fundamentally unrealistic and constantly demanding and is disconnected. So middle managers are the way we're going to get senior leadership really back connected in a sustainable way. Okay, so what are we learning? The book includes a whole load of novel research about how managers spend time. Essentially, it creates if you're an equation, too many managers are doing the wrong things. There are some really important roles which they should be fulfilling. We are going to share, I think we're going to share all these materials. By the way, I know you're welcome to keep taking photos of the slides. But I do hope, if we don't, please ask them, because I saw you snapping really quickly. With Katie this morning, she's like, oh, I just got my phone out, and she'd moved it on. So there was a lot to cover. So this is a really interesting one. So about a third of time, you're actually doing the work which, you've got some expertise in for sure, but really this reflects people who are given the title of manager, but they're not really fully playing a manager role. So that happens a lot with pay systems, doesn't it? Well, so-and-so's been around for a while, they need a progression, I'll make them a manager. Well, they're a terrible people manager, and actually what I want them to do is something else, but I can't fit that in the pay system, so I'm scared of losing them. So that's one of the factors over here, is too many individual contributors being required to manage. A full day a week on admin work, really going after that, obviously, and you see it particularly in sales forces, et cetera, just, how many more calls you could make if you could actually work with people to reduce their administrative burden. And then how about people like Bobby working on strategic work to make stuff happen on strategic projects, and what about really upskilling them on people leadership? So we want to shift time, not completely from here, it will never go away, but increasingly in this direction. And when you talk to middle managers, they're really frustrated with the bureaucracy, and that's why they're really at risk of burnout. Okay, a little bit more detail. On the right-hand side of the previous chart, what are the different roles we want people to play? And therefore, how would we want to train them and set them up for success? A big part over here is obviously people leadership, coaching skills, attracting followership within and outside the organizations, championing team health and inclusion, which is a massive driver of health and mental stress, as I'm sure many of you know. And then translating these ideas about, wouldn't it be cool if we had a project to understand our people ROI in 2 weeks into a realistic work. Spreading the word through their influence to get stuff done, and then increasingly kind of problem solving with data. So the book talks through these different roles. And then this is the part we're going to do some homework on, or we're going to do some work together on your tables on. I'm going to ask you to think about your own Bobby and think about these 5 kind of enablers, if you will, of a healthy system for middle managers. So the first one, streamlining the structure, this can be misinterpreted. Think of this as, when I actually look at across layers, spans and layers of my organization, have I actually got the right people managing the right span? So this isn't saying you have to reduce or change a span of control. You should be trying to optimize it. But you want to make sure that you have the right people given the spans and layers within your organization. So we know, for example, that for certain types of work, you can be a leader manager of a smaller number of people or a bigger number of people. So if you're in a call center or a transactional work environment, you'd expect to be able to manage more people because the work is more routine. So have somebody who can do that. And so if you don't understand your structure, you're unlikely to be having the right type of person in the right type of managerial position. And then call out, if people are genuinely individual contributors, let them be so. Roles and responsibilities, so changing the job description. A lovely chap from dinner last night isn't in the room, unfortunately. Andy was talking about, we were all talking about chat GPT and all of the rest of it, and he was talking about how thrilled it is. He's been able to work with his teams now that they can use ChatGPT, whichever version it is, to write job descriptions. That's great. And we had this conversation about whether that was smart or not, but think of how much time they could now spend on people leadership once they weren't agonizing about the 8th bullet point on what is basically a generic job description for a salesperson. So I thought that was a nice example. Managerial effectiveness within career stages and reviews. And this one is an absolutely huge one. I think a couple of you, when we went around the room, said, how much do you commit actually to the manager experience and developing them? And what is a dosage of training that is up to the challenge of the job? And I know that, Caroline, we can talk about this. Caroline's invested significantly in kind of trying to really revitalize a manager population, and what combination of digital and face-to-face experiences and over what time frame can you actually make a dent in that universe? And then accountability processes. So those are the 5 basic building blocks. And so what we wanted to do is now you can turn to your hymnal. You have a page. And just spend a little bit of reflection time and pick an individual who you rely on or you think about. And if we could just go through a little bit of an empathy exercise. And then which of these 5 building blocks do you think would have the most impact on that representative individual? And shall I give you about 10 minutes? And then we can discuss it? That sound good? Excellent. No, I was just going to say, we are at time, and I'm under a firm commitment. You guys are all going off for lunch now and can continue the conversation. I would like to leave you with one additional thought. Autonomy, close cousin, obviously, of freedom. I just leave you with the thought there's 2 types of freedom. There's freedom from, and there's freedom to. And when we talk about autonomy, we all get scared because freedom to, will they be able to do this product change without supervision? But maybe you all go back as senior leaders and you just think a little bit of freedom from. What would be one thing you could take away? One piece of bureaucracy, one pain point. To discover it, you'd have to talk to your manager. You'd have to uncover exactly what she's feeling in this position of being maybe over-promoted or under-prepared or whatever it is. But just have a think about that, because I think our role as senior leaders is just to enable as many people to be at their best as much as possible, and they're not going to do that if you're not actively trying to take away some of the pain points. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you so much.